Things I've learned in my walk with God. Now, I just want to let you know, if you haven't seen my testimony video of where I shared my testimony of how I started my faith journey, how I started my walk with God, I will put that video in the description and you can go watch that and see my testimony of how I started my faith journey. But in this video, I am going to give you 3 things I have learned, and and then in the fourth one, that is going to be a bonus one of what I've learned in my walk with God, and the things I needed to know in my walk with God, and the things that I've learned in my walk with God, as I continue to go down the road in my journey with God. So this is number one. Number one, I had to learn the growth. Now, what do I mean by the growth? So in the Christian life, there is a term known as sanctification. So basically how sanctification works is you are growing more like Christ each and every day. You are growing more into his image. You are growing, you are becoming more like Christ each and every day. And in my life, I started to see that in me as the year 2024 went on. I started to see things in my life kind of change. I started to see temptations go away. I felt like my old ways were starting to fade in my life. And I started to go from, I started to, get my mind focused on God, more focused on God more than I ever had. When I first started and the reason I say this is because when I first started my faith, like when I first came to God, I mean, yes, I did have that focus of God, but I didn't have this focus like how I do now. So when I say the growth, I mean like I felt like I went from times of not focusing on God at all to where now I have been focusing on God so much that things in my past started to fade, where things in my past started to as I focused more on God and focused more on his word and focused more on his love, I started to see things in my life kind of slip away, where things I used to do in the past started to go down and down and down. And some of these things I still have a struggle with, but as I focused more on God, I started to see some of the things that I did in the past go away as I remained faithful to him and as I continued to grow with God. Number two thing I had to learn is to stay focused. Now, number two, to stay focused. What I mean by to stay focused is one thing about, when I started my walk with God was there was a bunch of times where there was a lot of things in this world that really and even today, it still takes my focus off of God. And a lot of times, and nobody's perfect. And I think that points me to another point I want to mention in this topic is that, which kind of goes along with this one about staying focused, is there's been a bunch of times in my walk where I have messed up. And a lot of times it has been really difficult to stay focused in my walk with God. And a lot of times today I'm still learning is to stay focused on God in a broken world and in a distracting world. There's a lot of things that have taken my eyes off of God. And as I continued to go down the road, I had seasons and days and weeks where my mind was somewhere else. And today I still have that sometimes. But as a matter of fact, I still have that a bunch of times. But as a day and day goes by, I've been trying to remain focused on God and to stay focused on my commitment and my walk with God. And that is one thing I am learning, is to stay focused on God. Number three, and this kind of goes along with the last one with staying focused, but number three is just realizing that I'm not going to be perfect. Now, let me explain this one. This kind of goes with the second one, because there was times in my walk with God where there were weeks where I would do the same thing over and over and over. I even went through seasons of straight backsliding where I was doing things and I didn't care that I was doing these things. I didn't care about what I was doing. I didn't care about the complacency and the apathy that I was doing. I didn't care about like any of the things I was struggling with. I mean, it was just like a repetitive cycle over and over and over. It became habitual over and over, to the point where in the middle of 2024, I was focused on God. Like I was like staying focused on him. And then I think by the end of 2024, that's when some of these things in my past started to creep back up in me, and to where I started to backslide. I started to go from focusing on God to where my focus of God was kind of like fading a little bit, to where I was kind of like backsliding and backsliding and backsliding. And so, yeah, one thing I learned about in the Christian walk is that just learning that I'm not going to be perfect in it, and just knowing that Jesus is the only one who is perfect, and knowing that God is guiding me every single day. Number 4, I know I said there was, I probably said there was 3 things, but I actually have 5 things. Number 4, suffering and loneliness. Okay, so let me explain this one. So in the middle of 2024, so I was going through trials and tribulations, to where some of these trials were so like, some of these trials I was just experiencing deep loneliness. Like I felt like it was only me and God. It was only me and God. Like I felt like there were seasons where I was so lonely, like I just wanted somebody to talk to. But I realized that in that seasons, I had a God who would listen to me all the time. Just realizing that it was just me and God, where I could just, like the loneliness felt good at the same time, because, I had times where I can like talk to God and explain to him, and explain my suffering to him, and explain, everything to him, just knowing that he's listening. But there was times, guys, where in suffering, I had to go through the worst trials. There was even one trial I went through where it was so bad. I remember one time I was having an intrusive thoughts. I was having like blasphemous thoughts. That was a trial I went through, and that was the worst one I went through. That was one that made me have like panic attacks and stuff. And so one of the things I had to know and go through in my walk with Christ was just trials and tribulations. Just had to go through suffering, periods of loneliness. And even today, I still go through periods of loneliness, just feeling like it's just me and God, and just feeling like it's just me and him walking in the world. What is this? Number 4, I believe. I believe we're on number 5. Number 5 is, and number 5 is, well, this is, I think, is the bonus one. This one's the bonus one. Okay, so the bonus one. And this one is God's love and faithfulness. Now, let me explain this one. This one is kind of the one I've been excited to talk about. God's love and faithfulness. Now, what do I mean by this? So in my Christian walk, in my walk with God, in my entire journey with God, one of the things I've realized is God's love. Now, this one is obvious. We know that, God's love us, but let me explain. In my most imperfect times, there was times where I just felt like I did not deserve God's love. Like I felt like I just didn't deserve God's love, or I felt like I was just like such a horrible person. I felt like I was such like horrible. Like I felt like why would God want me? Why would God want me? Why would God want me when I'm doing all these things, when I'm, suffering this, especially when I was going through backsliding, when I was and going through the same repetitive behaviors every day. Like I was like, just, man, like, why would God want me? Why did God choose me? Why did God did like what? But then I had to just sit back and just focus on God's love and sovereignty, and just had to tell myself this, that God loves me, and he knows exactly where I am today. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows where his chosen ones are today. He knows where we stand today. Because he's faithful to his promises every single day. I have seen God's faithfulness in my life, and I question, like, how is it possible? How is God faithful to me in this time? But the question is, But the thing is, I had to do this. I had to trust God. I had to trust God. Yes, even in my most difficult seasons, I didn't understand why I was going through these things, but I had to trust God. I had to trust God. Because there was times where I was doing these things and I just couldn't understand God's love. But I had to realize this. God's love wasn't based on my performance. God's love wasn't based on how good I was. God's love was not based on how bad I was. God's love, he loved me because he chose to love me. He loves me because of who he is, not because of what I've done. He loves me because of who he is, not because of what I've done. So one thing I've learned is just how the last one is I learned how faithful God is. I learned how loving he is. I learned that to me, he's just like a loving father who takes great care of his children, even if that means he has to discipline them for their bad actions. And that's how I see God sometimes. It's just a loving father who loves his children super much. So those are the 5 things I've learned in my walk with God, with the understanding that it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. Jesus loves you. All right, guys. God bless and have a great day.